She had no idea that exposing the truth would cost her life. One shocking post turned her world upside down. Elara had always believed that her marriage was solid, a love built over years of shared experiences, laughter, and a promise to never betray one another. But one discovery, a simple text message on her husband's phone, shattered everything she knew. It was a revelation that crushed her heart. She had always believed that love would protect her, but instead she was faced with the betrayal of her life. The woman her husband had been seeing was older, much older, 62 years old to be precise. Helen, a woman who had no place in her perfect family life, had stolen her husband's heart. The more Elara uncovered, the more devastated she became. She couldn't believe it, her life was falling apart and she had to act. In the heat of her anger, she did something she would later regret. A single post on social media, exposing her husband's affair, ignited a chain of events she never could have anticipated. 1 week later, Elara was found dead. But how did it happen? Who would kill her and why? Elara was a woman who had always prided herself on her strength and independence. In her early 40s, she had built a life many would envy, a stable marriage, 2 beautiful children, and a quiet home in a cozy suburban neighborhood. She was the kind of woman who radiated confidence and warmth, always putting her family first. But underneath her calm exterior, Elara carried the weight of a love she thought would last forever. Her husband, David, was the man she had married right out of college. Tall, well-built, and charming, David had been her rock, her partner through thick and thin. He was a successful lawyer, well-respected in the community, and on the surface, their life seemed perfect. The couple had been together for over 15 years, raising their children, planning vacations, and looking forward to their future. But as time passed, Elara began to notice subtle changes in David's behavior: long hours at the office, distant conversations, and unexplained absences. And then there was Helen. At first, Elara didn't think much of her, an acquaintance from David's work. But as the years went on, Elara's suspicions grew. Helen was a 62-year-old woman who had worked with David for years. Their friendship, however, seemed to extend far beyond professional bounds. She was a widow, well-traveled, and lived a lavish lifestyle, but there was something about her that didn't sit right with Elara. Helen's presence was always marked with a certain coldness, a sense of entitlement that rubbed Elara the wrong way. What Elara didn't know was that her world was about to be turned upside down, revealing the deep betrayal lying just beneath the surface. It was a rainy Tuesday evening when everything changed for Elara. She was sitting at the kitchen table, going through the household bills, when David's phone buzzed on the counter. At first, she thought nothing of it. David was always on his phone, either working or handling business calls. But this time, the notification was different. It was a message from an unknown number, and the message preview read, "I miss you, Helen. Can't wait to see you again tonight." Her heart skipped a beat. Elara's hands trembled as she picked up the phone. Her mind raced, but there was no denying what she saw: a message from Helen. The same woman she had quietly suspected for months. The same woman who seemed to always linger too close to David, offering words of support, of comfort. The same woman whose presence she had once brushed off, now felt like a looming shadow over her life. Elara unlocked the phone, her breath shallow. Scrolling through the messages, she found more pictures of David and Helen, taken on various trips they had supposedly attended for work. The affection in the messages was undeniable, the language intimate. David had been lying to her for months, maybe even longer. The pain hit her like a wave, drowning her with the realization that her entire world had been a lie. She didn't know what to do first. Her mind was overwhelmed with anger, disbelief, and the desire to confront him immediately. But she was scared of the betrayal, scared of what this meant for her family, scared of the humiliation. The woman she had trusted the most, the man who had promised to be with her through thick and thin, had not only betrayed her trust, but had built a life behind her back. Elara sat there for a while, staring at the screen, struggling to hold back tears. The truth was now out in the open, and there was no going back. Elara's emotions were a storm, a mix of fury, sadness, and betrayal. As she sat in the silence of her kitchen, her hands still trembling from holding David's phone, she knew she couldn't just let this go. The truth had to come out. She couldn't remain silent, pretending that everything was fine. If David could betray her so easily, then the world deserved to know the truth. It was in the quiet of that moment that Elara made a decision that would change everything. The phone buzzed again, another message from Helen. "I'll be at your place at 7. Can't wait to hold you again." It was the final straw. Her heart was racing, her thoughts were clouded, but she knew she had to act. She opened her laptop and logged into her social media accounts, her public platform where she had always been the picture of perfect family life. But tonight, Elara would show the world a side of her life no one had ever seen. She wrote a single post, pouring all the rage and heartbreak into words. She attached the screenshots of David's conversations with Helen, the intimate messages, the photos, the lies. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she typed, each word a bullet that tore through the fabric of her marriage. This is the truth. My husband has been having an affair with a 62-year-old woman named Helen. He's lied to me for months and it ends now. This isn't the man I married. This is the betrayal I never saw coming. She pressed post. Within minutes, the response was overwhelming. People she thought were her friends began to comment, some with support, others with judgment. The post went viral, shared by people she had never met, stirring up a storm in her small community. At first, the flood of responses seemed like a rush of relief. The truth was out. But as the hours went on, the weight of what she had done began to sink in. Her phone rang incessantly. People who had once praised her now sent her angry messages. David had seen the post, and his silence only made things worse. The worst part? She didn't know what would come next. The backlash was already starting, and Elara could feel the walls closing in around her. What would David do? What would Helen do? And most of all, what had she just set in motion? The days following Elara's explosive post felt like a blur, a whirlwind of anger, judgment, and overwhelming isolation. At first, she had felt empowered. The truth was out there and no one could deny it now. But as time passed, the reality of her decision settled in. The supportive comments were drowned out by the angry ones. People from her community, friends, neighbors, even family began to turn their backs on her. The whispers started before she even left her house. David, meanwhile, remained silent, retreating further into himself. He didn't speak to her for days, his avoidance eating away at what little hope Elara had left. Every time she tried to confront him, he would brush her off or remain completely nonchalant. The emotional distance between them grew, like an invisible wall that neither of them could tear down. Elara's phone became a constant source of anxiety. She blocked several numbers, but the messages kept coming: threats, judgment, and even hate. A few acquaintances, the ones who had once admired her life, now called her embarrassing and immature. But the worst came from the ones who knew her best. Her own mother told her to stop dragging their family name through the mud, while her best friend, Emma, distanced herself completely, saying she couldn't support someone who aired their dirty laundry online. The weight of the backlash was suffocating. Elara had always been a strong, self-assured woman, but now she felt like a shadow of herself. The pain of losing not only her husband's trust but also her community's respect was unbearable. Every corner she turned, she saw judgment, from strangers, from friends, from family. As Elara struggled to cope with the aftermath, she began to feel something else: fear. What had she truly unleashed by exposing David's betrayal? And how far would this chaos go before it finally consumed her? 1 week after Elara's explosive post, the tension had reached a breaking point. The chaos from her revelation didn't die down as she had hoped. Instead, it escalated. Her once peaceful life had become a prison, filled with constant reminders of the betrayal, the public scrutiny, and the emotional toll. Elara found herself unable to sleep, unable to eat. Every time she picked up her phone, a new message would flash across the screen, each one a painful reminder of what she had done and what was happening to her life. It was as if everyone had a verdict on her actions. No one seemed to understand the desperation she had felt in that moment when she exposed the truth. The loneliness grew unbearable, and Elara's sense of reality began to blur. She didn't just feel betrayed by David anymore, she felt betrayed by the world. People who had once called her a friend now mocked her. The deeper Elara sunk into despair, the more she began to question her own actions. Was exposing David worth the pain? Was it worth the destruction of everything she had known? It didn't help that Helen, the other woman in this scandal, had gone silent. In the past, Helen had been brazen, sending cryptic messages, taunting Elara with her presence in David's life. But now, she too seemed to disappear, leaving Elara in the dark, wondering if she was being watched, if this was far from over. The strange part? As Elara walked through her days, she began noticing odd things. Unfamiliar cars parked near her home, shadowy figures in the distance. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. Could it have been David? Was he planning something? Or was Helen behind it all, waiting for revenge? The walls were closing in on Elara, and she had no idea what to expect next. It was a quiet Thursday afternoon when Elara's world came to a devastating end. The neighborhood had become eerily silent in the days that followed her exposure of David's affair. Elara, trapped in her thoughts and weighed down by the isolation, had gone about her usual routine, trying to focus on her children, keeping up with the housework, and attempting to mask the cracks in her world. But that afternoon something felt different. Her children had gone to play at a friend's house, and David, as usual, was nowhere to be found. Elara had taken to her usual spot on the couch, flicking through her phone, when a sudden knock at the door startled her. It wasn't a sound she was used to, no one visited anymore. When she opened the door, no one was there. Confused, Elara stepped outside, scanning the empty street. Her heart began to race as she looked around. And that's when she saw it, a car parked a little too close to her driveway, its engine running. She didn't recognize the vehicle. Before she could even process what was happening, a figure emerged from the shadows. Elara tried to call out, but the words were lost in her throat. In an instant, the figure lunged at her, the strong, rough grip of a hand pulling her into the darkness. She tried to fight back, but everything happened so fast. By the time the authorities arrived, it was too late. Elara was found, lifeless, her body cold and unresponsive, lying just outside her front door. No one knew who was responsible. No one knew why this had happened. Was it a random act of violence, a bitter consequence of exposing her husband's affair? Or was there someone closer to her who had been lurking in the shadows, waiting for this moment? Elara's life had been cut short, but the mystery of her death was only beginning to unfold. The news of Elara's death spread like wildfire, and the investigation began almost immediately. The police were baffled. There were no signs of forced entry, no witnesses, and no clear motive for her brutal murder. It didn't make sense. Elara had been a well-known figure in her community, and although she had exposed her husband's affair, she had never shown any signs of being threatened. The authorities were left with only a few clues: a shadowy figure seen near her house just before her death and the mysterious car that had been parked near her driveway. Detective Mason, the lead investigator on the case, quickly realized that this wasn't a random crime. Elara's social media post, her public confrontation of her husband's affair, and her sudden, untimely death all seemed to connect. But how? Was someone seeking revenge? Was David involved, or was there another hidden player in this deadly game? The investigation uncovered that the car near Elara's house was registered to none other than Helen, the 62-year-old woman Elara had exposed. The evidence was shocking. Helen, who had been quiet since Elara's post, seemed to have a much deeper connection to the tragedy than anyone had suspected. The more Detective Mason dug, the more he learned about the tense history between Helen and Elara, the emotional manipulation, and the dangerous territory that jealousy had led them into. In the weeks that followed, the police uncovered more disturbing details. It turned out that Helen had been stalking Elara, sending cryptic messages and even making threats. But it didn't stop there. The deeper the investigation went, the more David's involvement became suspicious. While there was no direct evidence linking him to the crime, his reluctance to cooperate with the investigation, his lack of emotional response to his wife's death, and his behavior after the murder raised enough red flags to make everyone question his innocence. But the truth was far murkier. Was it Helen, driven by revenge for being exposed? Or had David, caught in the crossfire of his own lies, done something far worse? The investigation would continue, but one thing was clear. Elara's death was no simple act of violence. It was the devastating consequence of secrets, betrayal, and a life shattered by lies.